Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. It's Patricia and Ron here from Chameleon. We are both email geeks and fans of email accessibility, which is our main topic for today. I speak about mostly the content and design side of accessibility, while Patricia will speak about email coding during this roughly 50-minute long session. So let's start. We're going to speak about these 6 topics. First, why accessibility matters, then the main principles of web accessibility, copy, design, code side of things, and finally you will get a checklist that you can take home, print out, or whatever you want to do with it. Let me start with a video.
Hi guys, so a lot of you have asked me how I use my phone, so I thought I'd show you as I order a coffee. Come with me, let's go. I don't have my cane, I'm sorry. Alright, so I actually have this a lot slower than I would normally do it because I want you guys to be able to understand it. But
product search field, C, 20, cold B, cold BR, cold nitro, cold brew, Irish cream, cold brew, cold
so
brew with cold foam,
I'm
Irish
wanting
cream, cold brew with Starbucks registered, Irish cream, vanilla sweet cream, cold
this,
brew, 1 vanilla sweet cream, size,
and now I'm going to customize it, so I want a venti because I really like coffee.
Venti, button, up, change size,
And it's giving me an alert.
Cancel, continue,
And I want to continue.
Add-ins. Regular ice.
And I want to add things in.
Splash of 2%. Splash of
okay, so I'm going to keep finishing this up because it might take a second, but that's pretty much how I do it.
It was the native Starbucks app, not an email. But regardless, this is the kind of experience we want all your subscribers with disabilities to feel when they interact with your email in their inboxes. Accessibility matters for many reasons, but I mainly focused on dyslexia, color blindness, and actual blindness, which affect many people on the globe. For example, 5 to 15% of the US population have dyslexia, while some other sources state that this proportion is somewhere in between 10 to 20%. On top of that, 4.5% of the population in Great Britain suffer from color blindness, and I guess pretty much the same is true for the rest of the world. 2.4 to 3% of the population is blind even in developed countries like the US and UK. And there are also many who are affected by temporary disabilities, for example like an eye surgery. All these need to be taken into account. Accessibility not only matters because of people with disabilities, but because of voice assistants that are becoming more and more popular these days. Alexa is the only voice assistant that can actually read out the whole email. The others, like Siri or Cortana, will only read the sender name, subject line, and pre-header with this lovely text saying that sender name sent you an email about subject line. It says pre-header. Would you like to reply? So this is the kind of experience people will have when they bounce up on your email while they're using their voice assistant. Google Assistant actually cannot read the email at all, which is funny because Google owns Gmail, but there are more funny things when it comes to Google and Gmail, so let's skip that topic for now. Let me give you a brief introduction into the web content accessibility guidelines that you need to take into account in your email templates as well. So the first one is perceivability or perceivable. It means that your content needs to remain easily consumable for people with disabilities. In order to reach this, you need to add alt text for your visual elements, subtitles for video, generally speaking on the web, which is not really applicable in email in most cases. You need to use sufficient color contrast and use design that works without colors as well. The second one is operable, which means that people need to be able to interact with their emails in alternative ways. In order to do so, you need to make your emails easy to navigate with keyboard, mostly tabs. Use descriptive links to help people understand what a certain link does. Display elements for sufficient time. It's especially important when you have animated GIFs in the email and avoid using visuals that can cause seizures or other unwanted physical reactions. The third one is understandability, which means that you need to make your text understandable for those who use screen readers. For example, you need to indicate the language at the very beginning of the email, follow copywriting conventions in a predictable way, and most importantly, make your text readable in terms of design and content as well. Your content needs to be robust enough to be compatible with all sorts of different user agents and assistive technologies that people with disabilities use. Patricia will talk about more on this topic in the coding session. So let me start with the copywriting aspects of email accessibility. I'm a big fan of email design, but I also believe that great design starts with great content. So everything starts with the copy. Before I would dive right into the email copy, I would like to highlight that no matter how great your email content or design is, if you fail to make the sender name, subject line, and pre-header interesting and trustworthy enough to make people open your message. Also remember that both Siri and Cortana will use the above format to read out your email. When you write email copy, please forget about SEO or Google. Use human-to-human language that's conversational and easy to understand. Even adult Americans prefer to read 7th grade level text, while the average would be able to tackle 9th grade as well. You can use, for example, Readable to check your readability score, and Grammarly to check how correct, clear, engaging your content is, and how well it's delivered in order to make the right impression on the reader. The free plan in both tools is already a good starting point. Always make sure to use headers and hierarchy in your copy, because the different header levels help your subscribers who use screen readers clearly understand the hierarchy of your message. Also, if you want to build up your email design system, it's best to stick with certain heading and text styles that should be carved into stone. Always avoid using all caps. The problem with all caps is not only that it can feel like shouting on the web, but it also makes your text much harder to read, especially for dyslexic people. Also avoid justified text, which might be a good idea from a design perspective, but it is difficult to read for both dyslexic and non-dyslexic people as well. This is because it creates large, uneven spaces between letters and words. When these spaces line up above one another, distracting river of white space can appear, as you can see in this later illustration. This can cause dyslexic readers to repeatedly lose their place when reading, and you can avoid creating the river effect easily by using left-aligned text instead of justified text, especially for your paragraphs. Also, if you use center aligning, make sure that the text that you align to the center is short enough. According to Litmus, if copy is longer than 2 lines, it should be left aligned. But still, center aligning seems to be more accepted in email designs than justified text. And actually there are many brands, including Starbucks, Disney, Airbnb, GoPro, or Nike, who refuse to obey this rule. And actually it's not a too good experience for dyslexic people especially, but it's also challenging to read for non-dyslexic people, because you just don't know where to go with your eyes when you want to start reading the next line. Make sure to break up large blocks of text always into multiple lines. As you can see in this short animated GIF, it's just simply much easier and convenient to read shorter paragraphs. And because they are more attractive to the eye, they will be more engaging to read for your subscribers. Best practice says that you shouldn't use longer paragraphs than 5 lines, so rather keep it as a maximum, please. When you want to put emphasis on something instead of italic or underlined text, make sure to use bold text, because it's much easier to read for dyslexic people, especially. I believe it also looks better from design perspective as well, to be honest. I always hated italic and underlined text, especially underlined. I think italic is good if you want to quote somebody, for example, but if you feel that the quote is more important than that, just stick with normal text and maybe a different color. I'm pretty sure that most of you heard that alt text is really important in emails because images might be blocked in some email clients, and also because screen readers read out the alt text loud. But it's still not too easy to write proper alt text for your images. Here are some tips to consider when you work on your alt text. Before we go through this list that I collected, I would like to remind you, never use something like please enable images in your email as the alt text for your images. Apart from that, it's important that you should never repeat the same alt text in your message. And every alt text that you add should be descriptive, short, maximum 100 characters, but most likely even less. In these 100 characters, you're better explaining your actual image that you wrote the alt text for and make it meaningful. The screen readers will not differentiate between alt text or title text, they read both. So make sure that you only use alt text in this case. For illustrations, no alt text is required. It's enough to add image alts only to those images that have a meaning in your email. The last one is that if it's possible, style your alt text. It can be something that looks cool for those who can actually see them. Of course, not for people with certain disabilities. Here's an example email from Fender. I ran a litmus test with it, and this is what the actual screen reader would understand from this email. As you can see, there's hardly any alt text in this email, and on top of that, this email is made up mostly of images only. Only these buttons are real buttons, but the whole Cult Classic Reborn section is a full image, actually an animated GIF, which you can see here. I would strongly discourage you from using almost full image emails like Fender does, and instead I'm a big fan of proper HTML emails where there are images and text combined with bulletproof buttons, and that's something that you can create with an email builder like Chameleon, for example, pretty easily. So even this email from Fender would be possible to build with an email builder like what we provide. But of course, there are other solutions as well. So whenever you add an image which has some sort of meaning to deliver to the user, please make sure to add an alt text. Just for you to practice, here you can access the code of this email and you can try to write better alt text. When you do so, please drop me an email and send me your version for this specific Fender email. If you follow these tips that I outlined previously, you'll be able to make your email copy accessible. Now let me show you the design side of accessibility. It's also related a bit to copy, but it's something that comes up pretty often as a discussion, not only in emails but on websites as well. Lines in your email shouldn't be longer than 75 characters. I think keeping the 600 pixel width as a standard is still a good idea, especially because if you have such limitation in place, you won't be able to write 2 long lines of text into your emails. And I'm a big advocate of short lines, even on blogs and websites, although I see, for example, medium.com uses something between 80 to 90 characters, but since their spacings are big enough, it's still convenient for the eye to read. In email, I would rather try to stick with shorter lines than a blog like Medium. Never make text too gray. Even if it sounds like a good idea from a design perspective, you want to keep readability in mind. Here are 2 color codes that you should take into account when you write text on a white background in your email designs. Always optimize the call to action size and spacing. According to WCAG, the minimum size for a call to action should be 44 by 44 pixel. Google advises a bit bigger with 48 by 48 pixel. And the minimum spacing, according to Microsoft and Google, should be pretty different, but I agree more with Google. Here's a great example from really good emails. It was an email with a long checklist where the actual checklist items worked as a checklist. So it's already a good job by CGU19. Congrats on that. So what I rank this email especially as that the checkbox size is 28 by 28 pixel, and the margin is 20 pixel on the right and even more on the left. So actually both the WCAG and Google guidelines say that the call to action size should include the spacing around. So this checkbox, while it's still small, it qualifies as a good call to action because the total size is already 48 by 48 pixel in this case. I mostly see this applied in email designs with the footer section, especially with social icons. So if you have small, let's say 24 by 24 pixel social icons, just make sure to add enough spacing in between them to make them clickable even on mobile devices. Once you have that nailed, make sure to optimize the contrast ratio in your emails. It's really important to keep the contrast ratio between the text and its background about 4.5 to 1 if the text is small and 3 to 1 if the text is larger. And what's really important, no rounding is allowed. So if you use webaim.org and you get a result saying that your contrast ratio is 4.4 to 1, you still need to change the color. You cannot round it up to 4.5. Let me show you an example for this contrast ratio issue. So here's an animated GIF from Vinyl Me, which looks cool, but it violates a lot of things, not only contrast ratio. It's all caps. The contrast ratio is only 1.96 to 1, and this moving can easily cause dizziness or vertigo for some people. And also the problem is that there isn't just enough time to read the text if you focus on it poorly. So this is good design, I love it, but if I take a look at it from an email accessibility perspective, I have to say no, please don't do this. Maybe a static image that can be played on a click would make sense, but that's not something that you would be able to do in an email. Or in this case, if I really want to stick with this design, I would think of slowing down the animation a bit. Maybe that would help to make this email easier to consume. But still, even in that case, the contrast ratio needs to be fixed. To be honest, it's really easy to run into this contrast ratio issue. I faced it myself as well when I prepared this presentation. At first, I used my standard light blue in the slides with white fonts, and after checking it, I had pretty much the same result, contrast ratio that was like 2 to 1. So I immediately updated my slides and the master template and changed everything to this deep blue that you can see in the slides now. So it's not a unique issue that we see in this image. It's easy to ignore contrast ratio. Here's a much better example from GoPro, where the hero image has a wonderful contrast ratio, much better than expected. Even the button has a wonderful contrast ratio with this black background and light blue. The only problem is with the text. This is pretty much what I faced with our light blue, that the text in this case has only a 2.12 to 1 contrast ratio, so the color should be changed a bit. One other important with color is that you shouldn't use color only to make something understandable. So, for example, when you have a chart, you need to add labels to it, or maybe even add a pattern to the chart bars, because this is what will make it easier for people with disabilities to understand your illustration. Maybe they might miss the color, but not the pattern, or not the label in this case. So it's the best if you use both a label and a pattern in your charts, for example. This is something that you can check in Trello. If you enable colorblind friendly mode, they will add patterns to every colorful label that you create in Trello, which I'm pretty sure is really helpful for people with color blindness. One last thing I would like to highlight is that you should always make sure that your email style aligns with your website. So here's an example from Strava. You can see there, this is how their application looks like, and this is how their emails look like. They follow pretty much the same guidelines, although you can see that the email had a slight design change. You will still know that, okay, this email came from Strava. The first thing you should do is build up your email design system, which you can do in various ways. If you use hand-coded emails, the best thing would be to create a master template that includes all your regularly used blocks, and whenever you or somebody from the team creates a new email, they should rely on this master template only. If you use an email design platform like Chameleon, you can create this master template with the visual builder. You can save each and every block to your company folder or to separate folders. You can group them according to brands, whatnot. So I believe that purpose-built email design tool can help those, especially who want to build their email design system and they don't want to just tinker around in their ESP, building emails from scratch or reusing random emails from the past. I think it's always best to go back and use those pre-designed elements in all the emails that you create, that you once approved and managed to agree on with everybody in the company. Okay, so this was my part. Let me hand the slides over to Patricia.
Hello, my name is Patricia and I'm an email developer at Chameleon. And today I will talk about accessibility from a coding aspect. At first, I will talk about small changes in the code that make your email more accessible. And after that, I show some email-specific issues and how to solve them. I made a repository for this workshop. You can find it at this address, and you can fork it or copy and use the examples and try the tips and test them. And now my first tip is to add a language attribute to your HTML tag. It's very useful because your user's screen reader will know how to interpret the email. So you can define it for the whole content, or if you have any content that for some reason it's in another language, you can put this attribute on that element as well, like a block quote or a p tag or an h1. It's really simple. So it's a small video about how to do this, but it's really easy. and it has no effect on the design at all. My next tip is a very important one. It's about add ARIA row equal presentation to every table element that we use. First of all, why we use tables at all? Email developers still using tables because Outlook. There is an inner logic with 3 levels of support on how the word engine handles CSS styling on various HTML tags. And the widest support of CSS is on table elements, table, th, and td elements. So for layout purposes, we're still using tables for consistent rendering across all email clients. Yeah, it's a safe bet for another clients too. Tables have the widest support. We can't rid of them, but we can use them wisely. Just use as many tables that really necessary. For example, for 2 or 3 column layout. And don't forget to add role presentation to every table that only for layout purposes, because without it, screen readers will read all the tables, rows, and cells, and it's not a pleasant experience to hear all the empty cells read out loud, and it won't inherit to the nested tables. So be cautious, and you have to be cautious about these exceptions too. This role has no effect on tables with borders. And if you use an actual table with data inside it, use semantic table elements instead. And about ARIA roles in general, role attribute is prioritized over the implied role of the HTML element. So if you just test any other roles, check that they are behavior how you expect them. Here is a short example how to use role presentation, but you can find a more detailed example in the repository. I think Roland already mentioned how important it is to organize your content in a logical structure, and one way to achieve this using semantic HTML file elements. But most developers don't force it because there are a lot of possible rendering inconsistencies. Every browser have a built-in styling system for semantic elements, and all the email clients have an impact on rendering because they're built-in processing logic. There are a lot of factors out there that can ruin your beautiful style. I'm not complaining. That's the beauty of this work. The testing can be time consuming, but it's really worth it because it helps user navigate and consume your content more easily. And if for some reason your email lost its styling, semantic elements still remain structured in a logical order. And there are fixes for the possible rendering inconsistencies. Just set a margin and make sure your CSS rules have no invalid values or typos in them. This topic is a little bit tricky one because using semantic list items are not that easy that it looks like. I mentioned previously that set a margin can solve everything except this one, because if you set a margin on a list, Outlooks with Word Engine will transform it a p tag with spans in it, and it's far from the optional because we're gonna lose our styling. And another benefit that is the screen reader can tell how many items there are in the list, and it will describe the type of bullet used to denote each list item. So this is not gonna happen on Outlooks, but there is a solution for that too. You can wrap this whole list in a container and put the margin on it. You can check it on the repository. And keep in mind, avoid image-only emails and use as many live text in the email as possible, because it later helps your clients find your email in the inbox using keywords if they want to use a coupon later or something, and easier to make last minute changes on the content. You don't have to modify an image, and less content will be unreachable in case of poor network. So avoid image-only emails, not just much better for accessibility, it's better for users in general. And here's our last topic. That is a really tricky one. Avoid auto-linking. There is interesting and strange behavior in some email clients. They just check your content, and any text or numbers that so-called reminds them to a phone number or address or date or something like that, they convert into a link, and it's gonna look like this. The problem with this, it's not reliable. This blue text can break the design and cause accessibility issues on a dark background. And if you're not intended to link to your user to a calendar date or something, it's essentially useless. There are some tips how to avoid this kind of behavior. Just use CSS reset rules to get rid of that blue color, and use classes unintended links and style them. But there is a catch. For accessibility reason, don't use only coloring. You mark your links with another method too, like underlining or bold, font weight, because people with color blindness may not notice that link. And there is another trick. You can use zero with non-joiners inside text that possibly affected by auto-linking. With this hack, you can trick the processor to miss your content, won't recognize it as an item to linking, and you can link them yourself with proper data, with styling that you can define yourself. So you can find an example for that in the repository too. And I think that's it. Here's some useful tools you can use, check them. And there are some really good resources about this topic.
And finally, here's the checklist I mentioned to you in the beginning. If you obey these rules, your emails will be way more accessible than most companies. So at first, you need to make sure that your email is understandable. You use human-to-human language that has proper hierarchy, headers, image alt text. From a design perspective, the contrast ratio needs to be just right, and you always need to be consistent with all your other communications. And of course, if you make your email accessible, I would strongly advise you to do the same with your website. And from the coding side, it's important to define the language of the content. So for example, I experienced once, I'm not a native speaker, but I guess you figured that out. So I made my computer read out an email in English, and since the language wasn't defined, it started reading out in my mother tongue, and that sounds really funny when somebody has a Hungarian pronunciation but still tries to speak English. Use ARIA with caution. We have that covered for you in Chameleon in our new generator engine that's going to go live in a week or so. So feel free to drop me a message and I'm happy to show you how we take care of that. Use semantic HTML elements, avoid auto-linking, it can be really annoying also from a design perspective, and avoid image-only emails at all costs. As I mentioned to you, and also as Patricia mentioned, it's a really bad idea to send emails that contain only images. Better use something where images and real HTML text have a good combination. Thank you for joining us today. Stay home, be safe, and take care. We'll be available here in the chat session for another 10 minutes if you have any questions or whatnot.